I'm going to read you the first page of chapter 15 because I think it's really important how he explains what this event means. Since I have grown older, he says, I've often gone back and tried to analyze the change that came into my life after that fateful day in school. There did come a radical change, and young as I was, I felt fully conscious of it, though I did not fully comprehend it. Like my first spanking, it is one of the few incidents in my life that I can remember clearly. And so, in some ways, it's associated with the ways in which his mother is teaching him right from wrong. It's a sort of key element in his life. But it also is so much more, not just to him, but it is supposed to be so much more to us. And I think that's where this interpretation is really important. Okay, in the life of everyone, there is a limited number of unhappy experiences, he tells us, which are not written upon the memory, but stamped there with a die. And in long years after, they can be called up in detail, and every emotion that was stirred by them can be lived through anew. These are the tragedies of life. We may grow to include some of them among the trivial incidents of childhood, a broken toy, a promise made to us which was not kept, a harsh, piercing word. But these, too, as well as the bitter experiences and disappointments of mature years, are the tragedies of life. So on one hand, he says in this paragraph, this is one of the great tragedies of his life. It's a shock. It's a formative moment. On the other hand, he doesn't want to give it too much importance. He says it's a part of his childhood. It's a fabric of his childhood, like broken toys or broken promises, like corrections from his mother. And so it's part of what turned him into who he was. And it's a really important incident. It's one of the few he remembers. But he doesn't want to say, this is the one thing that defines me, right? He doesn't want it to have too much importance. So he kind of wants to put it into a sense of scale. Okay, so let's see what he tells us about how we should think about it. He starts by saying how he thinks about it in his own life and what it's done to him and for him. He also gives us a sense of how we should interpret it, not just to understand him, but to understand ourselves if we are his ideal readers. And so I have often lived that hour, that day, that week, in which was wrought the miracle of my transition from one world into another. For I did indeed pass into another world. From that time I looked out through other eyes. My thoughts were colored, my words dictated, my actions limited by one dominating, all-pervading idea which constantly increased in force and weight until I finally realized it in a great and intangible fact. And this is the dwarfing, warping, distorting influence which operates upon each colored man in the United States. He is forced to take his outlook on all things, not from the viewpoint of a citizen or a man, or even a human being, but from the viewpoint of a colored man. It is wonderful to me that the race has progressed so broadly as it has, since most of its thought and all of its activity must run through the narrow neck of one funnel. And it is this, too, which makes the colored people of this country, in reality, a mystery to the whites. It is a difficult thing for a white man to learn what a colored man really thinks, because generally, with the latter, an additional and different light must be brought to bear on what he thinks, and his thoughts are often influenced by the consideration so delicate and subtle that it would be impossible for him to confess or explain them to one of the opposite race. This gives to every colored man, in proportion to his intellectuality, a sort of dual personality. There is one phase of him which is disclosed only in the Freemasonry of his own race. I have often watched with interest, and sometimes with amazement, even ignorant colored men under the cover of broad grins and minstrel antics maintain this dualism in the presence of white men. I believe it to be a fact that the colored people of this country know and understand the white people better than the white people know and understand them. Okay, so one of the very important concepts that he brings up right here is a concept which we typically identify as double consciousness, the dualism that he talks about, the broad grins and minstrel antics that maintain a certain dualism, he says. And what that suggests is a consciousness of one's own self as well as the expectations that other people have of you. And he says that this is what African Americans always live with. So the notion of double consciousness is really central to understanding what's going on in this novel.